Welcome back to the ghoulish delights of the Munsters. From 1964 to 1966, this fun-loving family of monsters proved that monsters don't just have to be terrifying, but could also be the adored stars of a primetime sitcom, as we got to bear witness to the comical antics of the Munsters in their modern-day suburban lifestyle. Not your average family dynamic, but a family that a generation of people would still fall in love with nevertheless. So today we're going back to this iconic horror-themed family sitcom by grave digging up some facts that you probably didn't know about this well-loved show. So let's explore 10 things that you didn't know about the Munsters. It's time to return to 1313 Mockingbird Lane as we take a deep dive into this classic horror comedy sitcom which has become a staple of 1960s television. And really, it's the perfect day for it. It's really dark and dreary and grey outside, so there's already a really spooky atmosphere around here. So let's not waste any time and let's move on and check this out. Number 10. Envisioned as an animated sitcom. An early concept of the Munsters first came about in the mid-40s, when Looney Tunes and Merry Medley's animator, Bob Clampett, approached Universal Studios about the idea of an animated series about a comical family of monsters. However, nothing came of it. Jump to the early 60s, and Universal started to take the concept seriously when Rocky and Bullwinkle writers Alan Burns and Chris Hayward also approached the studio about this family of comical monsters concept. This time Universal Studios were interested, where they hired writers Norm Liebman and Ed Haas to write a pilot, which incidentally was originally called Love Thy Monster. Number 9. Modern suburban family of monsters. One thing that intrigued Universal about the Munsters was the idea of creating a comical take on the idyllic family sitcom and giving it a twist. In the times of post-World War II, suburban life away from the cities was increasing, where families were moving to more suburban, quiet areas. And with that came sitcoms that were celebrating this modern family life, with the likes of Leave It to Beaver. In fact, the Munsters would be produced by the same producers as Leave It to Beaver, Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher, so it really was kind of a direct spoof. The main appeal of the Munsters was that it was a ghoulish satire on the modern so-called perfect modern family life. The characters may be monsters, but they are still a loving family. Co-creator Alan Burns claims that they were heavily influenced by the Addams Family cartoons, which, incidentally at that time, an Addams Family sitcom was also in development. Yep, that was quite the coincidence. Seeing how Universal owned the rights to classic movie monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Bride of Frankenstein, it was decided to base the characters of the Munsters on the images of those iconic movie monsters. And of course, the show would be picked up by network CBS. Number 8. Casting the Munsters. Now, when the pilot was in production, there apparently were still talks about the show being an animated series, which wasn't uncommon at that time, thanks to shows like The Flintstones and The Jetsons, but ultimately it was decided to film the show in live action. When it came to casting the Munsters, the first actors to be cast were Fred Gwynne as Herman Munster and Al Lewis as Grandpa, as the two actors had previously starred together in the show Car 54, Where Are You? And it was felt that their chemistry was just really good and they wanted to recapture that chemistry. In addition to that, Beverly Owen was cast as Marilyn Munster. However, the original pilot had two different Munster actors. Actress Joan Marshall was originally cast as Lily Munster, who was originally called Phoebe Munster. But apparently after the first pilot, Marshall was let go as it was felt that she looked too similar to Morticia Addams. So she was replaced with Yvonne DiCarlo, where the character became Lily. Apparently both Red Gwynn and Al Lewis were actually apprehensive of this casting, as she was already a big Hollywood actress star at the time. I guess they probably felt that she would overshadow them. But as the show went on, they did really warm up to her. Fun fact, despite playing Grandpa, who's meant to be an elderly character, actor Al Lewis was in fact actually younger than DiCarlo by a good year and a half. And of course, the character of little Eddie Munster was cast with a child actor called Happy Durman, but by the time the third pilot went into production, he was replaced by Butch Patrick, who, just like everyone else associated with the show, would become an iconic fixture. Number 7, the Munsters were originally in colour. So the Munsters pilot, My Fair Munster, which was filmed in 1964, was strange for a lot of reasons. Not only did Herman Munster have a different wife, as mentioned, but he himself also looked slightly different to what he would eventually look like. And above all, the show was filmed in colour, where the subsequent series would then be filmed in black and white, with the show literally going through a transition of colour to, well, no colour. At a time when colour TV was increasingly becoming the norm. Most strange indeed. So, why did this happen? Why was it decided to no longer film the show in colour after the pilot episode? Now, I actually found 2 reasons for the show switching from colour to black and white. One is because it was cheaper to film on black and white film stock, and 2, because it was felt that it would go with the show's macabre, ghoulish horror atmosphere. You know, make it look like something from a classic Universal monster movie. Who knows, maybe both explanations are true. Number 6, more than just a home. The Munsters' ghoulish home was in fact a set on the Universal backlot. In fact, the entire neighbourhood scene in The Munsters was a recycled set from a 1946 movie called So Goes My Love. And the set would also be used in the as mentioned Leave It to Beaver. The Munsters' house, which was really just a big prop, would also go on to be used in other Universal productions, where it would be redressed for movies including The Burbs, Dragnet, and even Desperate Housewives. The inside of the house was of course filmed on Universal sound stages. Not forgetting another iconic aspect of the show was its main theme, which was composed by musician Jack Marshall, the father of movie producer and frequent Steven Spielberg collaborator Frank Marshall. Now, the theme song had this twangy guitar sound that was popular at that time and was associated with beach surf music of the late 50s and 60s. And the theme song was so iconic, it earned a Grammy Award nomination in 1965, and has since gone on to become one of the most iconic TV themes of all time. Number 5, the recasting of Marilyn Munster. So in the early days of the show, the part of Marilyn Munster, a character modelled after Marilyn Monroe in order to be a comical contrast to the other monstrous characters, was played by actress Beverly Owen. But after appearing in the show for 13 episodes, she was replaced by Pat Priest, who would become a permanent part of the show. So how did this change come to be? Well, to put it lightly, Beverly Owen never really wanted to star in the show in the first place. According to Screen Rant, she felt like she was tricked into the part, as she told Universal that she did not want to star in the show as she didn't want to live in California. However, Universal convinced her to star in the pilot, and once the pilot was filmed, she was ready to move on. But she then had pressure put on her to sign a contract for an entire series. Apparently because a talent agent was threatening to sue her? Yeah, it's weird. So Beverly Owen took on the role begrudgingly. But she really wasn't happy filming the show, and supposedly would even often run off the set crying. But she managed to get out of her contract after 13 episodes, to which she was switched over in favour of Pat Priest, who would play the part from then on. Number 4, the nightmare of being Herman Munster. In the height of the show, The Munsters was very successful and would even get a nomination for a Golden Globe for Best Television Series. However, someone who may not have been celebrating was Herman Munster actor himself, Frank Gwynn, whose Herman Munster costume was torture. In order for him to look big and bulky, he would have to wear several pounds of foam, which got so unbearable while filming on the account that it would get really hot and he would sweat all the time. To try and ease his suffering, Gwyn would drink lots of lemonade on the set so he could stay hydrated, and the crew would pump air by way of air hoses into his costume in order to try and cool him down. So he was sweating a lot, was really uncomfortable, and losing large amounts of weight. While making that first season alone, Gwyn would lose 10 pounds from all the sweating due to having to carry around all that foam and just how hot it was. Not to mention the back pain he would also suffer from all the padding. Ugh. But just like a trooper, he still saw the part through and without a doubt really suffered for his art. Number 3, a ghoulish delight of props. According to Mental Floss, Yvonne DiCarlo may have had great chemistry with her co-stars on screen. There would often still be tensions on the set, and it came down to her hair and makeup, as she would often hold up filming due to trying to perfect her hair and said makeup. In other words, everyone would be ready for filming, to get the ball rolling, but they'll be having to wait for her doing her hair and makeup, I guess. And throughout the show's run, she would go through 5 hairdressers, which was just aggravating to everyone else. And supposedly when the cameras weren't filming, she mainly kept to herself in her trailer. Grandpa's ghoulish lab was actually the Dr. Frankenstein lab from the original 1931 movie, and it even recycled many of the props from that film. One of the most standout aspects of the Munsters was the family car, the Munsters coach, with it looking instantly iconic. The car was designed by automobile designer George Barris, who also designed the Batmobile for the Batman TV series. Another iconic vehicle attached to the show was Grandpa's hot rod, Dragula. This was made out of a real coffin. However, how the car was made was not so orthodox, as due to a law in Hollywood, a coffin could not be purchased without a death certificate. And so to make the Dragula hot rod, the coffin would have to be purchased at a funeral home with cash and was paid for after hours, let's just say. Number 2, the Munsters were defeated by Batman. For the first half of the show's run, the Munsters were doing really well. The show was popular and the views were good, with the show being ranked at 18 in the Nielsen ratings. However, by the time you get to season 2, things were drastically declining, as there was a huge drop in viewership. Something that has been put down to the Munsters suddenly losing its viewers was the Batman TV show, which started its broadcast in 1966 on rival network ABC. Yep, it seems that people were no longer interested in this show about a family of ghouls and were now more interested in watching the superheroics of Batman and Robin. Eddie Munster actor Butch Patrick would go on to say, quote, "I think Batman was to blame. Batman just came along and took our ratings away," end quote. And so, due to this drop in ratings, the Munsters were cancelled after 2 seasons and 70 episodes. But the show would go on to find further popularity in syndication, where it has since gone on to become one of the most iconic sitcoms of its time. It's just that at that particular time, it was no match for Batman. Number 1, the Munsters' legacy. Despite being cancelled in 1966, the Munsters were far from over, as they would be back for a variety of revivals and reboots. In 1966, there was a theatrical movie called Munsters Go Home, where this time, for the first time ever, fans of the show got to see the characters in glorious Technicolor. Then the Munsters returned in an animated made-for-TV movie in 1973 called The Mini Munsters, where Al Lewis seemed to be the only cast member returning where he voiced Grandpa. In 1981, 15 years after the show's original cancellation, there was a live-action made-for-TV movie called The Munsters' Revenge, which saw most of the original cast return, only there was now a new Marilyn and Eddie Munster. The most famous or infamous revival was probably The Munsters Today, a sequel series which ran from 1988 to 1991 and actually outdid the original Munsters TV show by producing 72 episodes, as opposed to that original show which consisted of 70 episodes. So, the Munsters today follows the exploits of the Munsters, of course, who are now living in modern day late 80s, early 90s. This was actually my introduction to the Munsters, and I can remember it was actually quite popular for its time. Despite the Munsters today being a follow-up series, many feel like it's more of a reboot, due to the Munsters all being recast. As the 90s went on, there would be further made-for-TV Munster movies, including Here Comes the Munsters in 1995 and The Munsters' Scary Little Christmas in 1996. In 2012, NBC made a pilot for a reimagining of the Munsters called Mockingbird Lane. However, no full series came out of this special, as NBC felt like the special just didn't hold well enough to warrant an entire series. This leads us to 2022 with the Rob Zombie Munsters movie, which acts as a reboot/prequel and gives a backstory into the Munsters, which right there is probably part of the problem. I don't think anyone was ever watching the original Munsters and thinking to themselves, well, gee whiz, I just need to know how the Munsters came to be. No. I think people would rather just watch the Munsters in all their glory rather than a movie explaining their backstory, in my opinion. Now, despite the movie being visually beautiful, which it was, you can't deny it, this movie looks amazing, this Munsters movie, which was filmed in Budapest and premiered on Netflix, really didn't go down well with the fans, due to the story being a hodgepodge of a mess, baffling creative choices, miscastings, and just not being particularly funny. At least this is going by complaints I've been hearing over the years. But once again, I can't stress this enough, you can't deny how stunning the movie looks. If I had to personally sum up the movie in one word, I guess it would be misfire. But despite all the adaptations and reimaginings the Munsters may face, it seems that original series which ran from 1964 to 1966 can't be topped or beaten. It just has the right ingredients to create the right magic. So the original Munsters TV show will always be celebrated as an iconic show that brought many households joy over the years and showed the world that you can still be a strong, loving family unit even if your household is full of scary, ghoulish monsters, or in this case, Munsters. Because at the end of the day, what we look like on the outside doesn't matter. What does matter is what we carry inside, in the heart. I think it's with good reason that the original Munsters TV show has become a beloved classic. It has kind, positive messages about how really we're all different and we're all a bit weird and a bit bizarre and maybe even a little freaky to other people out there. The best thing that you can do is to just be a good person. To quote Herman Munster himself, what does matter is the size of your heart and the strength of your character. See ya!